Legend of the War here, and today we'll be going through the Thrones of Decay Malachi McCason blog, which came out about 2 hours ago. I'm primarily going to be focusing on the Dwarf rework, but I'm just going to briefly go over the DLC content and just give some opinions. I haven't played the DLC stuff just yet, but I'll be playing it in a week, and of course you'll be able to ask me once I've had the chance to play it. So Malachi McCason, I think this is a good choice for a Legendary Lord for this DLC. We've already got a Slayer character in Ungrim Iron Fist, but we don't have a Dwarf Engineer, so him filling that missing slot for the Dwarfs, I think is really cool. So him being a Slayer and an Engineer gives him a lot of utility on, I think, on the campaign and battlefield, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs. I imagine he'll be pretty powerful, probably on the same sort of tier as Thorak Ironbrow, who is also an absolute beast. So if we have a look at his unique campaign, his unique missions appear to be very similar to the Norscan monster hunts. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Typically speaking, Warhammer 3 has a habit of reusing old mechanics, at least old ideas, and just putting a new coat of paint on it. So basically, there's monster hunts essentially, but it's more like quest battles. So the first one over here, you're going up against the High Elves, which is largely dragon focused, and it's providing you with a significantly better incentive than the monster hunts. For the Norscans, although the Norscans have a lot of monster hunts, way more than this. So if we have a look at this, what seems to be available, the first one is against the High Elves, or the Dragons, then the second one appears to be Chaos Dwarves, then Greenskins, then the Vampire Counts, then Nurgle, then Khorne, I think that is. I don't think that's Beastmen, that was the other one I thought it might be, but it doesn't really make sense for the one near the bottom to be the Beastmen. That definitely looks more like Khorne. And then the bottom one here is Skaven, of course, the ultimate Dawi enemy. Would have been really cool if the final enemy was actually Thanquol, and it's just been a surprise this whole time, and it hasn't been announced up until now. Of course, releasing Thanquol as a non-playable final boss for a faction, I think would be a bit of a wasted opportunity, so I really doubt that that's actually going to be the case. See, I actually have listened to a few audiobooks from the Gotrek and Felix novels, primarily the first three, where the Malachi McCason, I believe, shows up in the third book, where they take the spirit of Grugni and travel to Karak Doom. Now, that happens directly after the second book, in which Gotrek and Felix save Nuln from Thanquol, from the Skaven attack. Now, I don't believe Malachi McCason was at that particular siege, but they would have obviously talked about it. And I think one of Thanquol's agents was actually on the spirit of Grugni the entire book, and they didn't actually really have a payoff for it, but I imagine it pays off in the next book, which I haven't actually gotten to yet, so that was really interesting. I can't remember the name of that Slayer that was there, but they went off into the Chaos Waste at Karak Doom, and Gotrek goes and fights a bloody bloodthirster. You know how it is. Anyway, lots of Slayer stuff coming in here. So Spirit of Grugni is going to provide benefits on both the campaign map and on the battlefield. How that's actually going to reflect, I mean, you can read this stuff over here, but how it's actually going to perform, you really do need to watch actual gameplay to see how it performs. And in that case, the other YouTubers will be covering that now. Garagrim Iron Fist is the new Slayer legendary hero. I imagine he's just like a melee hero. Most of his stuff is going to be melee focused. Apparently he can swirl around and dish out loads of damage. But yeah, I don't imagine he's going to be casting spells or anything. So it'll be interesting to see what his skill line is like. I imagine he'll be quite strong. I doubt he's going to be as strong as Ungrim, because typically speaking, legendary heroes are sort of like a tier below legendary lords. So sort of think of him as a slightly weaker version as Ungrim. That's what I'm thinking anyway. Then we've got Slayer of Demons and Dragons. This is very Slayer heavy coming in here. So this is a new generic Lord. It's a Slayer Lord. I imagine he's going to be boosting Slayers. So now we've got a Lord outside of just Ungrim that gives heavy boost to Slayers. I still imagine that Ungrim is going to be the biggest boost for Slayers. But this guy here, you know, if you've got additional Slayers, why not have him command them? And as a Demon Slayer, he's going to be dishing out magical damage, which is going to be fairly good because there's a lot more demons in Warhammer 3 than there was in Warhammer 2, where there was barely any, and magical attacks are a lot more valuable now. And the Dwarves don't have that many units that dish out magical damage by default. It's really just hammerers for the most part, which I don't think are the most ideal unit to bring, unless of course you're going up against demons specifically. Then we've got the Dragon Slayer, the new generic hero. So I imagine that this guy here is probably going to be boosting Slayers, but apparently he's also bringing in a lot of fire resistance. I don't consider that to be like the greatest thing ever. A lot of units do have flame damage, but I really want to see this hero here boost Slayer units, similar to what the Gatemaster does for Cathay. If he's able to provide in his skill tree like a +4 melee defense bonus for all Slayers attached to the army, that could be really cool to like put a bunch of these guys in an army to really boost your Slayer armies beyond what you were previously capable of. But I'll need to wait and see what the actual skills are for these guys here, which I haven't seen yet. The new unit, the Doomsaker, sort of like a more specialist Slayer unit. Be interesting to see how they perform. These guys here appear to be swinging these chains around, slaughtering a whole bunch of goblins. It kind of looks like these guys are being like spinning loons, similar to what the Fanatics are doing. So it's like the dwarf variant of that. So that'll be interesting to see. Slayer Pirates, a ranged variant of the Slayers. So yeah, it's very Slayer heavy. I'm not going to focus too much on it. Grudge Raker, something that's not a Slayer. This is kind of a counter to the Blunderbusters, I imagine, because it mentions that over here. So Grudge Raker is already a weapon that's in the game in terms of a selectable option, mutually exclusive for the Dwarf Engineer. So it's a short range option that has a spray shot, dishes out more damage, but significantly less range for the Engineer. So they'll be equipped with these weapons. I imagine these will be shorter range than Thunderers, probably about a range of 90, which would bring them in range with Blunderbusters, and have a much more potent shot. But again, you're sacrificing range for that. I kind of feel as though Blunderbusters might be stronger than them if I just had to have a guess, but they might be exactly the same. Who knows? But yeah, it's supposed to be the regular dwarf variant of the Blunderbusters. Then we've got the Goblin Hewer, which is a new type of artillery. I imagine it's going to be sort of like a faster shooting version of a bolt thrower, with these possibly being anti-large. I'm not entirely sure. Then again, if it's got a Goblin Hewer, and goblins aren't typically large, maybe it's anti-infantry. Be interesting to see how that performs. I imagine it wouldn't be a particularly high-tier artillery unit. And then we've got the Thunder Barge. This is probably going to be a tier 5 unit. Now, currently, there are no tier 5 units in the Dwarf roster. Everything can be recruited once you get to tier 4. So I imagine they've basically left room for this to be the new tier 5 unit. I don't imagine this will be able to land, so it's going to have a similar sort of weakness to the Sky Junks of Cathay. But it looks like it's going to pack a hell of a lot of power. So as long as the enemy aren't bringing a hell of a lot of flying units, then this thing is probably going to provide you with a hell of a lot of power. I'm curious to see what a Doomstack of Thunder Barges is going to be like. So that'll be interesting. I imagine we'll be getting a submission pretty damn quickly for that. Now, Dwarf Legacy updates. This is what I really want to focus on here. So, this is where I want to read out and give my opinions and how things are currently working with the Dwarfs. So, the Great Book of Grudges. This rework seems to primarily be focusing on the Great Book of Grudges, which I don't think is a bad thing, because that's definitely something that has already had a rework. So this is kind of a rework of a rework, but I think that the Dwarf rework that happened in Warhammer 2 was really kind of minor, so I guess I'll title this video the Dwarf rework. Because yeah, it's already had a rework. Anyway, grudges aren't as rewarding as they could be in the current system, and thus engaging with it may not always be the best course of action, making it feel less important overall. Plus, grudges often push you into doing things you were already going to do, rather than encouraging you to make actual tactful decisions. So, just bringing up Warhammer 3 in its current state. This is an old save file, probably a disaster campaign. This was submitted a long time ago. So, if you let the grudges get out of control, the penalties, the maximum penalties, are diplomatic relations -20 with dwarfs, which isn't that big of a deal, especially if you've already confederated Belagar, who provides quite a significant boost to relations with dwarves. That can basically mitigate that entirely. Research rate -20%, which at this stage of the campaign, probably not that big of a deal. Then you've got control -3, which is really only going to be impactful for legendary difficulty. And if you don't own Karaza Correct, this one here provides a global bonus to public order. So a lot of the stuff here can be mitigated and then ignored. Charge bonus +15 all armies is really only going to be beneficial to Slayers, because typically speaking, you don't charge your units in, you hold the line while your missile units pound the enemy forces. And this will also allow for more Slayers to show up in your Regiment of Renown pool. And the benefits of keeping the Great Book of Grudges satisfied, basically the reverse. some benefits to diplomatic relation, research rate, construction cost reduction, extra control, and low chances of getting slayers. So not super impactful, but on legendary difficulty, you definitely want to keep that down in the early stages of the campaign, and then later on, it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes you can end up with grudges that will be really inconvenient to go and fix up. So, for example, sometimes a faction might not be at war with you, but might just be trespassing on your territory and might be in raid stance. So, as an example that I've experienced before, I had a faction that, I don't know, was migrating or something, and they raided through my territory. It was a vampire account. They raided so that they weren't taking attrition. It wasn't costing me much money, but it got put a grudge on, and I didn't have any armies in the area, and that army went off out into the distance somewhere and just settled ages away from me, and it just wasn't convenient to go and take it out. And over time, the grudge severity went up to something insane over just one raid, and to one point that grudge was the entire severity. And it was just really irritating because it wasn't convenient for me to go and send an army just to kill this minor vampire dude who raided me ages ago. And I get it was thematic with the dwarves that they just don't forgive or forget. But that kind of stuff happens all the time, and it was just kind of annoying. Now, I imagine the new system is going to be quite different from that. So, the Grudges being a series of missions also felt like an underutilization of the mechanic, and the features usage on the campaign map needed some more work. It was definitely better than the first iteration of the Great Book of Grudges, but now we're providing Oath Gold and sometimes some character runes, sometimes some really good character runes, at least for the starting Grudges, like for example, taking out Skarsnik, giving you, well actually fighting the Greenskins 5 times. I was fighting Skarsnik 5 times, I can't remember, and giving you a Rune of Spite. That's particularly good because that's a very good character rune. So I don't really agree with it being an underutilization of the mechanic, but then again, if you're going to improve it, that'd be great as well. But I didn't feel like it was bad before. Grudges were not as urgent as we would have liked either. A big part of the Dwarf's power fantasy is having to right the many wrongs surrounding you, which didn't quite land with the original system. Again, some of the stuff felt urgent, but inconvenient is probably the word I would use to go sort it out, because if you're playing a legendary difficulty, which I do, usually the dwarf situation is pretty untenable at the start. You got a lot of enemies, and sometimes a grudge forms for someone that's not really one of your enemies, and if it's super severe and you're like fighting quick, well, I don't really care about sorting out someone that raided me once ages ago, as opposed to dealing with the mass amounts of Skaven invading, especially considering how dangerous Skaven are to dwarves. Another issue was that you could sometimes get stuck with grudge missions you couldn't complete, which would be unfairly tank your severity bar. I think that sort of references what I was talking about, although I think there were some grudges that were actually impossible to fix, although I never really had that issue. That being said, I don't play dwarves that often. So what are we changing? Grudges will now be present and fully visible on the campaign map. So I've been watching a few videos, I actually watched the Great Book of Grudges video on the Great Book of Grudges. I'll actually link his video in the description because I think it's a really good one to go and watch, where he goes over the details of the Great Book of Grudges. Man, I'm going to be saying the Great Book of Grudges a lot here, okay? So there's the YouTuber Great Book of Grudges, and then there's the mechanic Great Book of Grudges, right? So each faction that is sort of like an enemy of the dwarfs, like for example the Greenskins and the Skaven, will have a number across their armies based on basically how much of a bastard that particular army or faction has been to the dwarfs as a whole, and taking out those particular characters and armies will award you sort of like grudge points, and satisfying those grudge points keeps the Great Book of Grudges in check, but also helps out with the Age of Reckoning, which is being introduced here. So we're introducing a new system, Age of Reckoning. Every 10 turns, the dwarves will have a target number of grudges that must be resolved, and the percentage of those grudges that have been taken care of at the time of the reckoning will correspond with certain rewards. So if we go back up here, we can see this mechanic. Let's go pretty much all the way up the top. Up here, that's this mechanic here. So this meter is going to keep filling up, and basically you don't want to not fill up the grudges. You can see at this point here, they've got 2 turns left, and they've filled up 76%. And the more you fill it up every 10 turns, the better the bonuses are going to be. But if you don't fill it up, you're going to actually get penalties. And I definitely think this is a better system than the basically stale grudges that end up causing you problems for a long term in the campaign, or you get to the point in your campaign where a grudge is formed and you just instantly deal with it straight away, and like this person's campaign is in really good shape, whereas there just isn't really any grudges going on whatsoever. So I think that is a better system that's going to make constant use of the grudges, because this is going to keep going every single turn for every 10 turns for each of the dwarf legendary lords. So you're going to have to pay attention to it. You're going to want to be fighting constantly with your worst enemies. So clearing a high number of grudges will result in buffs and new grudge settler units. These are kind of like, from what I can tell, regiments of renown variants, but specifically rewarded based on your ability to sort out grudges, and that you've got a limit to how many that you can put in each of your armies, like with alliance units or your gifted units with Warriors of Chaos, and even a temporary grudge settler army at the highest ranks, but low performance during age will come with penalties. Fair enough. Legendary grudges are also available, and these are grand missions that benefit the entire dwarf culture when resolved. For example, taking the fight to Skavenblight and the Hell Pit will reward you with a unique army ability to summon dwarf miners in your own territory now that they're no longer under threat of Skaven attack. Or you may also attempt to rebuild the Karaz Angkor, unlocking underway travel network, which will allow for fast travel between Karax. Fast travel is definitely something that I'm for, but I've definitely heard some people getting a bit sick of fast travel because it's becoming like something that every faction is having availability to. But you have to understand that the Warhammer 3 Mortal Empires map is really quite huge. Fast travel will reduce campaign fatigue, as you're not just pressing end turn as your army has to get from one side of the map to the other. Being able to fast travel around is definitely going to be useful, and you have to actually work towards getting it. So I think this is a good system, and I saw, based on the Great Book of Grudges video, that there's quite a lot extra, like new landmarks that'll be unlocked. There's a new legendary, like a pseudo-legendary lord that'll be unlocked. So these legendary grudges are more potent than the current starting grudges, like take out 5 of Skarsnik's armies. And then confederations can also be earned by outgrudging your fellow legendary lords. After exceeding the amount of grudges another lord has earned, plus an additional amount, you can confederate the other factions via the Book of Grudges panel. So, Great Book of Grudges explained the Great Book of Grudge system here perfectly, I think, in that, let's say that Belagar, let's say you're playing as Thorgrim Grudgebearer, and you want to confederate Belagar, and that his amount is like 15,000. So you have to get 15,000 more grudge points than Belagar, but Belagar is also accumulating points. So if you and he are at the same number of grudge points, you're not going to be able to confederate him, at least not this way. I'm not sure if the old system of being able to just diplomatically confederate them will be available. I would imagine not. So you have to just outgrudge them by smashing the greenskins and the Skaven, and once you're much higher ranked than him, you'll just be able to confederate him. So you don't have to worry too much about the sort of finicky confederation system that exists in Warhammer 3. It's actually really good that they're making more unique systems of confederating, because the diplomatic way of doing it in Warhammer 3 is actually, in my opinion, inferior to Warhammer 2. So that's good that they're sort of phasing that one out. So we feel that this new system for the Great Book of Grudges expands upon the fantasy you expect to have when playing as the dwarves. And I agree with this. I think all the changes they're making to the Great Book of Grudges seems pretty reasonable, and it forces the player to engage with it and actually feel fun to engage with it. Punish the player for doing a bad job, reward the player for doing a good job. That's really what the mechanics should be doing, so I'm looking forward to playing the dwarves. Then the technology tree here. I think this is really a light touch. So the original technology tree for the dwarves is massive, so much so that it can be tricky to keep track of it and engage with it. Not so tricky for me, I feel, because I've been playing Total Warhammer for pretty much a decade now, and it hasn't really changed in that amount of time. It's just, that's a lot of text, right? So what they're doing is they're splitting up the way of the guilds and the way of the clans, which is currently actually split up, but there'll be 2 different tabs. And I think they're consolidating a lot of the technologies, so there's not so many of them, and also doing like a balancing pass to make them a bit more impactful, because some of the technologies in here are definitely like Warhammer 1 level buffs, like +3 leadership on a Wednesday sort of thing. And then they can be quite potent later down the track as well. So imagine they're just doing a balance pass with all of that. As for what the bonuses with the technology tree is, I don't know. I did see that one of them, again through the Great Book of Grudges video, was that when you capture a new settlement, you instantly get 2 population surplus. And also some of the technologies will have a cost of oath gold, giving you something to spend your oath gold on apart from just using the forge. So I think that's a good system to use. You know, various different mechanics all throughout the campaign, not just in one different way. So, not wanting to remove the text from the dwarves, we now split the original tree into 2 parts, with guilds tab and clans tabs respectively, and we've done a full sweep on all effects. Yep. Then building chains here. Now, this is a bit weird, because it's, like, it doesn't explain itself very well here. I think they could have done a better job of explaining this, because I was able to just have a look at the Great Book of Grudges video and get a much better look of what's going on here. So I'll read it out and then sort of explain my interpretation of it. So we're making some tweaks to the dwarf building chains, one key example of which is a level 5 build in the Traders Guild Hall, which will grant oath gold every turn. Now that's a little bit of a weird description, because if we have a look at the building tree for the dwarfs, this building is currently tier 4, and it generates oath gold per turn. So they're saying, we're changing it to do the exact same thing that it was doing before, but from what I saw from the Great Book of Grudges video is that it now goes tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same thing with the economic building. It goes all the way to tier 5. Now, I'm curious as to whether it's going to be 600 at tier 4 and then, I don't know, 800 at tier 5, or whether they've just moved 600 up to tier 5. Putting extra layers of buildings is all good and well, as long as there is an actual benefit at the top compared to what we've got in the current system. Again, I haven't seen what the actual bonuses are or what the effects are of these buildings, so I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that they've put more building for you to do in the dwarf settlements, and these ones here specifically, they go up to tier 5 as well. So I imagine that you would probably get more oath gold than what you currently do with the guild marketplace, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, I found this to be a weird description. I think this was a case of, like, they didn't really make that much of a change to the buildings, but they just had to put something in the blog, so they're just like, just put this in, you know, sort of thing, and just move on to the next topic. So Oath Gold was, before the changes, quite tricky to play around. You often had far too little, or on the other hand, more than you could ever need. This change should help alleviate that stressor. Yeah, see, that's the situation, right? You either got not enough, just the right amount, or way too much, you know. Those are the options, really. But I imagine it was a case of you just didn't get much in the beginning of the stage of the campaign, which is kind of the case with a lot of these other, like, secondary type of, like, resources. And then by the end of the campaign, where you've got a lot of passive income and not that much need for it, you're just rolling around in it and just pumping out Ironward and tankards like crazy. Assuming that's what you want to get. Then the Forge. What are we changing? We've had a look at the Forge items and done a full polish pass to make them advance in smaller increments so that you won't always need a specific resource for to forge certain items. Now, lots of different ways you can interpret that. So if we have a look here, there are already some items that don't require specific resources. So are you saying that these no longer are required at all? It's only going to require Oath Gold? Or is it sometimes the Troll Slayer's Act is going to need iron? Or do you only need iron for the first one and then it's just Oath Gold? I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I didn't see that in the Great Book of Grudges video. Maybe he covered it and I just missed it, but I just didn't see that. Overall, I think the current system is pretty good because it sort of incentivizes you to go out and collect resources in order to actually forge these items, not just use Oath Gold. You need to actually get the required materials to make them. So that you couldn't just get the Oath Gold and then instantly start forming the obvious best item, the Ironwarden tankard. You actually had to go and get pottery, which was more difficult to get for some Dwarf Lords than others. Like, it was pretty easy for Karaza, Karak, and Belagar to do it, but it is very difficult for Grombrindle to do it because he starts so far away from any pottery. You have to basically establish a trade agreement with someone that does actually have access to it, because everyone here has got access to pottery from the Empire or pottery down here, assuming that, you know, a tradable faction owns that settlement. a faction that you can trade with, I mean. So it's a smaller change than those mentioned prior, but given the system a light polish nicely adds to the overall improvements made to the dwarves with this update. I'm curious to know if they've fixed the exploit. So I'll just briefly explain what the exploit is with Oath Gold. It's only really worth doing in the beginning stage of the campaign, and truth be told, it's not really that worth doing. But basically, with the introduction to fusing, what you do is you buy 2 of the same, maybe I get 4 of the same items, 4 veteran hammers, right? And then you fuse those 4 veteran hammers, which cost you 120 in total to make, right? Yeah, 120 in total to make that, which gives you 2 green items. And then if those 2 green items are of the same type, you fuse them again. And then that gives you a blue item. Now, if you were to then dismantle a blue item, let me just see. I'm sure this guy's got one. I just need to unequip it. Find a blue item in here. It's got everything but blue. Come on, surely you've got a blue item. 120 turns of the campaign, no blue items. Come on, surely you've got one. There's one, there we go. So let's get you, I just want to unequip that because you can't dismantle items that are that are equipped. And we can see here that to recycle this you get 130 back. Now I spent 120 to get to the other trickster shard in this scenario here, so you're getting 10 back. So basically you can just keep forging, then you just use the 120 that you gain from that, get some more grey items, fuse them, recycle. Keep doing that over and over again on very early on in the campaign, and essentially get unlimited Oath Gold. Again, super tedious, don't really recommend doing that. I'm just curious to wonder if they're going to fix it, because it's been in the game forever. Again, I don't consider this a high priority exploit. But anyway, as for the overall Dwarf rework, I think the stuff looks pretty good, especially the stuff with the Great Book of Grudges changes. I think of the 3 different reworks for Nurgle, Empire, and the Dwarfs, I like what I'm seeing with the Empire stuff the most, then the Nurgle stuff, and then the Dwarfs, if I was gonna, rank them. Now, that doesn't mean the Dwarf stuff is bad, I just think the Empire stuff is especially good, because each of the Empire Lords now feels like their own DLC campaign, whereas Thorgrim Grudgebearer still isn't going to have any different mechanic over Grombrindle or Ongrim Iron Fist's campaign. And then there's, of course, Belegar's campaign, which starts off with a really hefty penalty at the start of it, and you make that go away at the end of it. So there's basically going to be 2 factions, being Thorek and Malachai's, that will actually have a unique mechanic to their campaign. The rest will feel a bit generic. And then that's why I think that the Empire rework is better than the Dwarf rework, and actually better than the Nurgle rework, which, again, I think the Nurgle rework is pretty good. Not having played it, I can't really say definitively, but I'll find out pretty soon because we'll have access to this in about a week. Anyway, that's the end of this one here. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. You let me know in the comments below what you think of the Dwarf rework. I'm pretty happy with everything that I'm seeing with this DLC so far. Now, you guys know that if CA ever fucks up, I'm one of the first people to smack him down, right? But honestly, they've been pretty good this year so far, so I really have no complaints. So I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. I think the content is matching the price. But let me know in the comments below whether or not you think that's the case, because sometimes these shiny new things coming in can blind us to some maybe problems that you might be seeing. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. I think that most people are pretty happy with what they're seeing so far, though. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out the Great Book of Grudges video about the Great Book of Grudges, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.